There will come a time when you need a prerequisite for something, even though the prerequisite doesn't exist. In this case, you can create a prerequisite using the prerequisite editor. I'm in the MegaView 1.0 project in the Redistributables view. And if we look at the top of the list here, there is no prerequisite for Adobe Reader. In this video, we will create a prerequisite for that. Then we will add the new prerequisite to the MegaView installation. I have already downloaded the Adobe Reader 11.0.04 redistributable. I've also downloaded a document called Deploying Adobe Reader 9. Let's have a look. Here's the folder under the IS 2013 projects. You look in the folder, you'll see the document Deploying Reader 9.pdf. And here is the file that we need to extract. So the way to extract this is you need some command line switches. I went to the Adobe website and found this document. It's a couple of versions old, but they don't seem to have an updated document around. If you look in here at the command line switches for Adobe Reader for extracting the files, I tried it and it still works with this later version. So that's why I'm including the document here. I also have a command line window open, an administrator command prompt, and I've typed the command in that we need to extract the Adobe Reader files from the executable. So let's do that. And I must have typed in a character wrong. When you get these long command lines, let's have a look here. I see I have an extra 0. There we go. That's working. Command line is finished. Let's go to the folder and have a look. And we see that it extracted all of the files. Now what you need to do is copy these to a folder on your hard drive. This is the installation folder for InstallShield 2013. It's under Program Files x86 on a 64-bit machine. And prerequisites are in the Setup Prerequisites folder. If we scroll down the list here, we see all of the prerequisite definitions that show up in the Redistributables view for InstallShield. Now, a lot of times, these definitions will refer to files in these folders. What you can do when you're creating a prerequisite, you can create an additional folder, like one that would say Adobe Reader such and such, and you can copy the extracted files in there. I would copy all these files. I wouldn't copy this one or the document. I would copy all of these files to the folder here. And then when we define the prerequisite, we're going to reference those files. So let's do that. I'll create a new folder, Adobe Reader 11.0.04. I suppose the full name is Adobe Acrobat Reader. And then I'm going to copy the files to the folder. Now we can create our prerequisite. Let's go back in to InstallShield. To create a prerequisite, you have to run the prerequisite editor. Let's go to the Tools menu, select Prerequisite Editor. And the first thing that you want to do is that you want to save this to a meaningful name. The InstallShield gives it a default name when you open up the prerequisite editor. It says my setup prerequisite.prq, but you want to save it to something else. And you want the name to be meaningful because that's what's going to show up For example, the name that you name the prerequisite file is the name that shows up in the list. So that's why when you look in this folder, all these prerequisite files have very long names. So let's go back, open the prerequisite editor. I'll do File, Save As, and I'm going to call this Adobe Acrobat Reader 11.0.04. I'll save it. Okay, it doesn't like it. It thinks I'm going into the folder. Let me go back up here to this. I will take Acrobat Reader out so it won't get confused. This is the folder we have our files in. Do it one more time. Prerequisite editor. File, Save As. Adobe Acrobat Reader 11.0.04. Is that correct? Yes, that's what I want to say. Save. Now we'll go through each of these tabs and set the various parameters. On the Properties tab, when you open the prerequisite editor and you save it out, InstallShield creates a globally unique identifier for the prerequisite. Just leave this alone, leave it at what it is. Here we have an alternate location to download the PRQ from if the prerequisite files are being downloaded. Well, they aren't, but I have a URL in here that I can put. This is where you get the Adobe Reader software. Next is the Conditions tab. When you run your installation, it's going to go through each prerequisite that you have selected for install. And what it's going to do is go to the conditions that you have defined in the prerequisite, and it's going to test for them on that particular system. That's how it determines if the product is already installed, or rather if the prerequisite is already installed on the system, because it's not going to install a prerequisite if it already exists. That would be crazy. So that's why you add conditions to a prerequisite. So let's add our conditions for the Adobe Reader. We're going to select the type of condition to be a registry key that does or does not exist. You have other selections here. You can base it off a file or a platform or whatever. Now we need to specify the registry key to check. I did some looking in the registry with Adobe Reader 11 installed, and this is one of the registry keys that is created when you install it. So we're going to check for that. And then it asks, check the following registry location on a 64-bit system. We will leave it set to default. And then this is very important. Run this prerequisite if the specified registry key exists or if the specified registry key does not exist. Well, obviously, we want to run the prerequisite if the registry key does not exist, because that means it's not installed. Let's click OK. Here's our condition. Now, in some cases, you will have multiple conditions. For example, you notice that some prerequisites are for x86 and some are for x64. So you will have different prerequisites for different versions of Windows, different prerequisites for different bit depths of Windows. You will have to create separate prerequisites for each of these, and you'll have to do more condition checks. You'll have to check for the Windows version and also the bit depth. But for Adobe Reader, this is all we need. Let's go to Files to Include. And we want to add multiple files because the files we extracted, there's more than one. I'll go to the Adobe Reader 11.0.04 folder that I created. I'll select all of these files, click Open. Now that they're added, go to the Application to Run tab. It says specify the application you wish to launch. We'll click the drop-down list and select setup.exe. And you notice these are all the files that we added in the previous tab. Of those files, we have to select one to execute. And then we have to specify the command line. That's where the document comes in that I included in the IS 2013 projects folder. In that document has the command line switches. So I know to do a silent installation of Adobe Reader, I want to use this command line. And I'll just tell you what these are. This first switch here is to run in silent mode with no UI. The second switch here, /RS, is to suppress the reboot even if it is required, because we don't need a reboot with Adobe Reader. Now this last one here, specify the return code. The application returns if a reboot is required. We don't need to do anything with that. The next tab is a behavior tab. Let's go through this. The prerequisite requires administrative privileges. Well, I always select this because whenever you do an installation, you really need administrative privileges. Unless, you're doing standard user, but even there, you still have to get administrator credentials entered to run your installation. The next option, the prerequisite may be optionally skipped by the user. We don't need to select that. The prerequisite should be hidden from the installation list. Well, no, I don't want to trick the user and install something behind his back, so I want it to show up in the list. And the fourth one, progress should be shown in the prerequisites window. Yes. Show it. Show the progress. We want to keep the user apprised of what we're doing. Now, in some applications, you may not want to inform the user what you're doing, but we do. If after installing the prerequisite, the conditions still indicate it is required, we want to continue the setup. If the prerequisite appears to need a reboot, we want to ignore it and fail to resume if machine is rebooted. And then on dependencies page, we'll leave this blank. This is for if you have a prerequisite that requires other prerequisites or other things to be installed, you would have to add them here. But Adobe Reader does not require anything else. Now that we have finished, we need to go to File, Save our changes. Got to save your changes and exit out. Now, even though we defined it, it doesn't show up in the list. And why is that? Well, when you run InstallShield, it goes out to the hard drive and looks at all the prerequisite definitions and loads them in. But it only does that when you first run it. So we have to close the project, exit out of InstallShield, run it again, open our project back, Go to the Redistributables view, go to the top of the list, and here's our prerequisite, Adobe Acrobat Reader. Now that we've defined the prerequisite, we need to include it. So I'll select it. Normally, I would run the installer at this point and test the prerequisite install, but I'm going to wait to do that until the next video. That's how you create a prerequisite. Believe me, this will come in handy, so remember that you know how to do it.